Hello, everybody. I am Patrick Daugherty, joined by Mr. Kyle Dvorchak, where we are going to answer all of your Week 5 waiver questions, all your just general trade and team questions, anything you need to know about fantasy football. Stuff is getting real. Injuries are mounting. Bye weeks are finally beginning. I don't know what I mean by finally. I wish they weren't beginning. Although for work purposes, we kind of like that they're beginning. 4 teams on bye this week, including Justin Herbert's Chargers. He needs a week to heal up his cyborg hand. The Browns, the Seahawks, who are playing this evening against the Giants, the Buccaneers. Kyle, it's a weird week. If you need help with roughly a quarter of the season in the books, it's not really coming on the waiver wire this week. But there's people to add every week. Kyle, who would you say is the top waiver wire add of Week 5?
Yeah, as we're getting into bye weeks, we actually have to worry about our onesie positions, mainly at quarterback. We are looking at CJ Stroud, who has the second most passing yards of any rookie in NFL history through 4 games. I wrote in my waiver wire column titled literally CJ Stroud is him. He's the real deal. He is a legit NFL quarterback. He is the top add.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned CJ Stroud because even before his third straight 2-touchdown performance against the Steelers on Sunday, another game where he just looked like by far the best rookie quarterback in this class. Even if the accuracy tailed off a little bit yesterday, he had a few more misses. He really gets into rhythm, and the rhythm he's in with Nico Collins, who had never had 100-yard game coming into the season, has now
that shocked me. You told me that, and that shocked me.
He's now hit 146 in 2 of his first 4 games with CJ Stroud. And so it's funny that you mentioned CJ Stroud because I had this date circled for a long time. I'm in a guillotine league, actually, with the Fantasy Football Happy Hour group. I have Justin Herbert. I knew Week 5 I had to have a streaming quarterback. Herbert was not going to be available, and now even if he had been healthy, he might not have been available. I had Dak Prescott as my backup. In a guillotine league, you need to have a backup quarterback. Like, you need to be rostering 2 quarterbacks since every week is literally life or death. But last week, I made the decision to swap out Dak for CJ Stroud, and I can't say I feel any worse about it after what we saw on Sunday. We haven't seen like that explosion, like ceiling effort from CJ Stroud, and they could be like holding his hand, kind of being like a caretaker, making him still trying to not open it up too much for him, but he's forcing their hand more and more every week. And it's a good matchup in the Falcons. And he could reach the point pretty soon, CJ Stroud, where he's well beyond that 50% threshold and he's just not on waivers anymore.
Yeah, he's at 47% right now, I believe. I published my waiver wire column at 2:00 and change, so it's only been out for a few hours. But if I remember correctly, he's at 47%. And I mean, we haven't gotten the 3 touchdown blow up. That's really the big hang up, is that in Week 1, no touchdowns, and then back-to-back games of 2 touchdowns. We haven't gotten the 4 touchdown blow up. And at quarterback, his peak is 384 yards, but ultimately the yards are sort of ancillary to the fact that a guy who throws 5 touchdowns could throw for 212 yards. Touchdowns count so much more at this position, whereas like wide receiver, you can go 10 for 80 and it's like, oh, that's a great game. No touchdowns, don't care. So we are still, like you said, waiting on that like big 3+ touchdown game. But I mean, he's got 2 games already over 300 passing yards, 3 games at 2 touchdowns. I'm probably ranking him, depending on his matchup in any given week, between QB9 and QB14, but he's basically in that bridge QB1 territory, and he's been so good that I'm not really moving him out of 14. I think it's probably the floor I'll have him, at least the way things stand right now, going forward.
Questions are rolling in. We're going to try to get to all of them tonight. I'm not going to give you a chance to comment on this, Kyle, because we need to start answering the questions, but I noticed in your column too, you mentioned Matthew Stafford as a Week 5 streamer, and you made an observation I made last week, like, the touchdown rate's unsustainably low. There's no way it could remain this low.
Yep.
And then it is still remaining weirdly low, and has been weirdly low for a lot of his career. Actually, it's like always been it has to just be a statistical quirk. No, but I totally agree. Matthew Stafford has been looking revived, is not getting Cooper Kupp back. That touchdown
Calvin Johnson scored like 5 touchdowns in his 1,900-yard season. Sorry, I just had to blurt that out because I know that stat.
We'll get to our first question here from Fran. He's addressing me, but we're going to address you, Kyle. Who should pick up the waiver wire? Khalil Herbert, Gus Edwards, Jaleel McLaughlin. Let's just use this as an opportunity to talk about one of the only waiver wire stars of Week 5, Jaleel McLaughlin. Even though we don't know if Javonte Williams has even been ruled out for Week 5 yet, What do we
No,
tell people
far
with that
from it.
situation? What do we tell people about Jaleel?
Yeah, I had Jaleel, I think, as my number 2. I had technically had Jalen Warren as my number 1, but he's at 55% roster rate. So it's more of a, you should be checking. He should be 80+% essentially. After that, you're looking for someone like Jaleel. But for me, it's still in your league. I don't think Khalil Herbert is available, and he's got to be way over 50% if he's available in your league. He's still getting the majority of the work. Do I think that holds to week 13 or 14? It kind of seems unlikely. Before Sunday 1:00 kickoff, we got a report that, Roshan has looked good and his role will continue to grow. We didn't
get
see
that
that
every week. It's so bizarre. I don't know who is pushing this narrative.
I know.
Someone is pushing this every single week.
To be fair, the report was that over the long term, his role will grow, which is probably a strategical, I don't want to be wrong in week 4. So I'm going to say by week 10, which is what fantasy analysts have been saying. So it's not really that much of a report, but I do think he's looked really good. He's already controlling a lot of the passing down work. So I think it's sort of fair to say Khalil Herbert's days are numbered in the long term, but in the short term, I'm going to project him to outscore Gus Edwards and even Jaleel McLaughlin, who I like, in week 5, probably even week 6.
Real quick, Jaleel McLaughlin, off the top of your head, if Javonte Williams doesn't play, just pick a number. He is RB what in your rankings this week? It's going to be imprecise, but from the gut, what is Jaleel McLaughlin for week
41?
Against the New York Jets, 41, that's pretty low. I'm going to have him higher than that.
I mean, P. Ryan is still going to play more than him. I believe P. Ryan played more snaps than him last week.
He did.
I think he's
I have
more
a theory
fun
on
exciting.
that. I don't know why I'm cutting you off, but I have a theory on that where mid-game, they're not going to hand the reins over to the rookie. It made total sense for Samaje Perine to take the lead there when someone gets injured in the course of the game. I do think now with the week-to-game plan, if Javonte Williams is out, the Jaleel McLaughlin will slide in almost 1-for-1 for the Javonte Williams role. Perine will be heavily involved, of course, and probably a little more involved than he would be on a normal week. But I wouldn't be surprised if Jaleel does have the snap advantage this week, even if Samaji's snaps are higher than normal. We could debate that all week, and I'm sure we will.
I like that, though, because, I mean, I think Jaleel was a strong prospect. He was he was D2 and then FCS prospect, and he gets 4 years and change, 4.5 years, essentially, of football games played. But he literally does lead all, the NCAA history in rushing yards. It was at Youngstown State and Notre Dame of Ohio, if I remember correctly.
Your stomping grounds?
I have literally driven by Youngstown State and have had beers from breweries who sell to Youngstown State. But regardless of the fact that I can touch the stadium, which for, Clemson, Alabama, Notre Dame, me, 5'7", 140 pounds, you're not enough of an athlete. Get out of here. Don't come close to the stadium. I get that it's low levels of competition, but he was low levels of competition, one of the best prospects we've ever seen. And then he played well in the preseason. He was PFF's number 1 graded running back on 15+ carries in terms of his run grade in the preseason. He was getting targets in the preseason. So I want to be where you are in terms of the optimism. And I think you're right that a lot of times we try to extrapolate this. Oh, this is what they did in the final quarter and a half of this game. That's not their game plan. It literally cannot be their game plan. Otherwise, they would have been planning for a player to get hurt. So I agree with you, and I kind of want to be where you are in terms of the Jaleel McLaughlin hype.
We'll have a lot more on Jaleel on the site. SV Lou 77, very long time viewer, always asking good questions. They want to feel better about selling high on Raheem Mostert, who did have a bad game, 7 carries, 9 yards, 2 fumbles in Buffalo. But he did sell high for sure after week 3. Is he going to live to regret that? Jeff Wilson could be coming back from injured reserve very soon.
No, he says, make me feel better about not selling high.
Okay. Yeah.
He's saying last week he had the chance to pass the bag off onto someone else and apparently didn't. And even worse is last week, we saw Raheem Mostert run more routes than Devon Achane, which was okay, well, they have maybe these sort of roles defined for them. I believe, well, I guess that was 2 weeks ago in the Achane breakout. Now, if you want to call it last week, I guess we're still in the midst of week 4, whatever. 2 days ago on Sunday, or a day ago on Sunday, we saw Devon Achane run more routes than Mostert. To me, you see Achane break out in week 3, then they start using him more as a pass catcher out of the backfield. It's the Achane takeover. And unfortunately, not sure I have much to tell you about.
Well, I do. I will say
sold high.
The Achane, as he apparently wants to be known.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry.
He still could remain, I think, in that 10 to 14 weekly touch range where he might almost be hard capped on his touches. He did exceed that hard cap, of course, against the Denver Broncos where he had over 20. And Mike McDaniel was talking about Monday. He was lamenting not establishing harder against the Bills. I don't think it's Jover yet for Raheem Mostert, and that it's going to very much remain a two-man backfield. It will be interesting if they want Jeff Wilson to have a role. I could see Jeff Wilson becoming the goal line back. Not Devin Achane will get red zone carries, as we saw against the Bills. He's such a weapon, especially in those end arounds. But yeah, Raheem Mostert, by the letter of the law, will never be more valuable than he was after week 3. That is a fact, but I don't think he's going to be like dead weight on your roster. Hardly any backfield is a one-man backfield anymore. It's always going to be 2 or 3 backs. If you're going to have committee backs, which we're all going to have, make them part of one of the 2 or 3 best offenses in the NFL. So I don't think you have to feel super bad about not unloading Raheem Mostert. We know here's the injury history, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, you don't have to feel super bad about it, I would say.
I think you should feel a little bit.
Jesus Saves saying, yo, hello, Jesus. Michelle asking good questions every week for years and years and years. Not sure what the question is. She's not sure what her question is, except for Mostert, Moss, and Madison. Now what? Feels stuck and won't get anything back in trades. Thank you so much. Let's say, I'll narrow this down for you, Kyle. Between Mostert, Moss, and Madison, 3 guys with big-time question marks. Who do you feel the best about, say, over the next 4 to 5 weeks, the meat of the fantasy football season?
I'm going to say Madison. We saw we're going to ride the hot hand in the Vikings backfield situation. Well, I'll say unfold, but essentially Madison came out, looked like he was playing for his job, played that well. I think he averaged like 5.6
keeping
a carry.
A running log in the Slack chat about, yep, Madison definitely playing for his job today.
And he's playing like he knows that. I think 5.6 a carry, was breaking pretty good chunk runs throughout the game. Whereas Moss, a week or 2 ago, I was very convinced that Jonathan Taylor would never play another snap for the Colts. We've been hearing that he's returning to practice on Wednesday, and there have not been any reports. There have actually been sort of opposite reports that the trade rumors have sort of died off in terms of Taylor. So he's returning to practice. Trade rumors have died off. I guess they're going to try and patch things up with him. And from Taylor's perspective, he doesn't have a ton of choice other than to play. So to me, Moss, his days could be numbered. It's still very possible they work out a trade, but the risk is 0. Like, the risk is that he goes to 0 for Moss. Taylor's back. Moss is not playing. I get that Moss has been a 3-down back in the past 2 or 3 weeks. When Taylor's back, you're playing Jonathan Taylor. So Moss, very reasonable risk of going to 0 fantasy value. Mostert, I don't think he goes to 0, but it seems somewhat clear that he is the number 2 running back. Madison is still the number 1, and he looked good in both this past week, and he got a ton of work in the week before that. And Cam Akers has been the most inefficient back in the NFL this year. So for me, it's Madison. I still think it's risky, but all these guys are risky, so I'll take Madison.
I think over the next month, Raheem Mostert probably scores the most fantasy points there, just by sheer virtue of being in the Dolphins offense. I will say in Madison, every once in a while, you have to make kind of a pure gut call in the rankings. And I went with the call that Cam Akers was going to lead the Vikings in touches. Yeah. Madison was just so bad in week 3, just really kicking the ball all over the yard. But he did have his best statistical output. He actually then did build off that in week 4. Madison does, of those 3, control his own destiny the most.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
I just think he's such a limited player, and I'd rather bet on Mostert. Moss is the one in by far the most trouble because he's Zach Moss, and Jonathan Taylor is not going anywhere. But it's an interesting group. You don't have to totally panic there, Michelle. Diego, yet another longtime viewer. As we add, we must also subtract. Anonymous. It's like an all-time.
He types like you talk.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's like an idiom. Are you holding on to the myth of Marvin Mims, or would you consider dropping him for someone like Michael Wilson? This is a classic bye week question because we love Marvin Mims' upside. We've seen him put big plays on film, but the touches are so limited. When bye weeks start, you have to really start making tough roster decisions. Answer the specific question about dropping Mims for Michael Wilson, but then just talk about Marvin Mims too. What do you think his outlook is?
Yeah, assuming you don't have to start one of these guys in week 5, which that's an assumption. It's very possible you have to pick a flex guy out of these, but I'm going to say you don't have to start one of these guys. For me, it's still Marvin Mims. Was like an elite college prospect with extreme production, especially dating back to his time as a freshman at Oklahoma. And now he comes into the NFL and looks like one of the most explosive players every time he touches the ball, every time he runs a route. So I'm holding on to Marvin Mims throw it out. No matter what, Marvin Mims. And that's from someone who drafted a lot of Michael Wilson. It's like, he's so cheap. He's going to run a bunch of routes. And now he's capitalizing on that. I'm going to say either way, take Marvin Mims. He was a very strong prospect. His team valued him at the time of the draft as that prospect by taking him on day 2. I'm going to say roll with Marvin Mims. And even if you have to start one of these guys week 1, Michael Wilson projects for more fantasy points in week 5. I will concede that. And I will say that you're losing a point or two in projection this week, and you're making it up in week 6, 7, 8, 9, etc. No matter what, go Marvin Mims.
I've been interested in Michael Wilson since Johnny Venerable came on our podcast and was like, the Cardinals are obsessed with him, but the offensive environment is just a little too shaky. And even if you forecasted 5 to 6 weekly targets for Michael Wilson and only 3 to 4 for Marvin Mims, the more explosive player, it is Russell Wilson, but it's still the better overall offensive environment. I think you have to bet on Marvin Mims there still. Cody wondering if the pain ever goes away. Depends on if the Seattle Seahawks win tonight. I'll say that. Cris wants to know, should he stash Jeff Wilson if he has Achane? Was thinking of dropping Kareem Hunt for Wilson. The Jeff Wilson, what do we tell people with Jeff Wilson? Because it does feel like annoyance is coming in this Dolphins backfield, and that you think it's tough to prognosticate with 2. I kind of do feel a 3-man backfield coming, but do you even feel a 3-man backfield coming? And what should he do with Jeff Wilson?
No, you're definitely right that a 3-man backfield is coming. I mean, they have Raheem Mostert, who has extremely struggled with health issues throughout his career. Devon Achane, who I think is 188 pounds, at least at the combine. I think that's what he weighed in at.
Yes.
So, of course, you don't want either of those guys. You don't want either of those guys to take 50% of your backfield touches. You're probably much more comfortable in that 40 or below range. And Jeff Wilson, the touches he could get, even if it's only a third of the touches, they come at the goal line. It's very possible. But to me, I think Jeff Wilson's touches almost certainly come out of Raheem Mostert's workload. To me, Devon Achane is at a minimum a guy where we talk about, Elijah Moore schemed a bunch of touches. Can he build on that? I don't know. Achane is absolutely, he's schemed touches, and he obviously looks like he can build on it. So to me, Jeff Wilson is really a very low, if non-existent threat to Achane. Would I take him over Kareem Hunt?
I think I would. I would chase touchdowns with the Dolphins than I would chase whatever.
You're probably right about that.
Kareem Hunt with the Browns. I totally agree with you that Devon Achane's role, they've got a very specific role in mind for him. And the other players are kind of irrelevant to whatever they've got planned and going on with Achane. I think I really like that breakdown of the Dolphins backfield. We're going to get to everyone else's questions. Sorry to already go back to Diego, but it was an interesting question. I thought, you've been playing Kincaid. Will you yell at him, Kyle, and convince him to pick up the Ferg daddy, this being Jake Ferguson? What do we tell Diego? And Kincaid, it's weird. He's got a floor. That's all he's had is a floor. Nothing even close to resembling ceiling.
Yeah, Kincaid, his week 4, and I have been generally the same way where I'm like, yeah, he's probably out there and getting 2 to 3 targets at a minimum, but 4 to 5 almost at a max. Last week was the best week in terms of his usage that we've seen. He had a 79% route rate. His 17% target share tied his season-long high, and we finally saw him push Dawson Knox below a 50% route rate. It could be matchup, right? The team definitely has the option to play Knox, who is fine. I don't want to say he's good or bad. He's
at 12 yards or fewer each the past 3 weeks. Dawson Knox.
Okay, so you know what? Shoot, let's say Dawson Knox.
There are games. There are pop-up games coming for Dawson Knox. Is the problem?
There probably are.
He's gonna have a 2-touchdown. He's gonna par him at some point and have a 2-touchdown game.
I think he might not par him for a few more weeks though. It might be week 9. So on your advice, I'll say Knox really just isn't an impediment to Dalton Kincaid. And for a rookie, he's already had 2 games over a 75% route rate. I think things look really good for him. I really do think where I was skeptical of their ability and desire to run him as essentially their third wide receiver, they've shown some ability to do that already. And then in week 4, we saw the highest route rate for his season, technically for his career, for Dalton Kincaid. I'm holding on to him. This is about as optimistic as I've been, because my sole argument against him was that he has sort of 2 routes to viability. It's that they are the most 2 tight end heavy team we've ever seen. That's a very thin path. Or he flips Kincaid. He's looking like he's flipping, or he flips Knox. He's looking like he's flipping Knox.
Only thing I'll say, Ferguson, so I agree. Kincaid, I think, is building towards something, and I'm going to keep him ranked ahead of Ferguson. Ferguson does have at least 7 targets 3 of the first 4 weeks, and that's with the game script is never, ever being normal. Like, Dallas is going to start playing normal football games at some point where they actually have to pass the ball, and it is pretty interesting usage for Ferguson. But on the other hand, Gallup is finally getting more involved. At some point, Brandon Cooks is like going to do something. Maybe not. Maybe he's like truly quiet quit on his NFL career. But I am intrigued by Ferguson. If Diego wanted to like roster churn, I think there would be some pretty serious risk in dropping Dalton Kincaid. I liked your Kincaid breakdown. Jacob Ander here has, I think, more of like an overall strategy question. Is there any defense that's too good to drop? I would say that there certainly are. There's very few of them that are too good to drop. Would you agree with me that you can't when you have the Cowboys, you're not streaming except for when it's the Cowboys bye week?
No, I'm going to say versus the 49ers, it is at San Francisco, so I would imagine they will be underdogs. In this situation, because you said you have Justice Hill and Sky Moore, I would cut Justice Hill. He saw like 3 carries last week. I think Melvin Gordon and maybe even Gus Edwards ran more routes than him. I agree that there is spots where, I wouldn't bench this defense, just hold on to them because they're the most talented defense. But in this situation, you're not playing Justice Hill next week. I don't know if you'll ever play him again this season.
Yeah.
I'm fine cutting him. There are other spots where I'm like, you suck it up, you play a talented defense, and if the opponent drops 28 on you, that is what it is. But you have bench spots to spare in that. Even Sky Moore would have been an acceptable drop. I don't know if I would have done it, but it's easy when you have Justice Hill, what are you doing with Justice Hill? Cut him.
I think any given year, I think there are only 2 or 3 defenses that should not be churned. Not to like insult anyone's intelligence here with such obvious analysis. You can't drop the Cowboys defense, clearly. Like you're not streaming. Again, unless it's a really bad matchup, you might add someone else to stream. But yeah, the Cowboys are one of the rare fantasy defenses that must remain on your roster all year. Again, I know this is just breaking news.
Pat, what if you have like a let's say Tank Dell is sort of the last player on your roster? You've got a good roster. Dallas plays the 49ers away this week, so they're probably they're probably underdogs with a reasonable 49ers total. What do you do in that spot?
I'm sucking it up with the Cowboys because I'm rationalizing though and telling myself stories like Brock Purdy is so overdue for a multi.
I thought about that too.
Yeah, like he's so due for 2 turnovers. I would try to rationalize the Cowboys are good enough. But yeah, I'm only dropping someone like Justice Hill or Sky Moore, basically.
Sure.
I would not be dropping someone I envision actually contributing to my team, like Tank Dell. Kyle wondering, he got offered Kyron Williams and DJ Moore for Tyreek Hill. Keep Hill, right? Yes. Sorry. Correct, Kyle.
No, I think it's Gain Hill. Oh, keep Hill. Sorry, I didn't finish the sentence, which I could have read. Absolutely, you keep Hill. And this is from someone who week 1, I said Kyron Williams, and this is proven to be mostly correct so far, is like league winner potential, but I don't think you're getting, Tyreek Hill right now is a top, I think he's the 3rd overall fantasy player, right? It's Jefferson, CMC, and then Hill. And there's kind of a tier break after that, frankly. It's not like that's the 4th player. It is a gap to probably the 4th player. And as much as I've loved what we've seen as someone who drafted a decent amount of DJ Moore, I've loved what we've seen for the past 2 weeks, especially last week, was Denver is on pace to be the worst defense of my lifetime. These guys are dreadful. So I am thinking this is a very strong sort of sell high moment for DJ Moore, or in this case, for you, don't let someone swindle you out of Tyreek Hill moment.
Yeah, not trying to make fun of Kyle. This was a pretty obvious one. Yeah, not even close to enough to get Tyreek Hill off your roster. Anthony James has Lamar Jackson and Anthony Richardson. Too much excess quarterback value. He has to trade somebody. What kind of wide receiver? Instead of saying a specific receiver, you can maybe use some examples. What kind of receiver do you have to get back to trade one of these dual threat quarterbacks?
For me, I'm probably looking. I think last week we talked about me saying I want to hold on to Tua and trade. Let's say it was Lamar. I don't remember who the second quarterback was, but it was a more premier quarterback and Tua. In this case, to me, the second quarterback is going to be sort of on a week-to-week basis very undervalued by the trade market. I feel that way with Anthony Richardson as well. It's funny, these both align with my preseason priors in which I've been proven right on Tua and Anthony Richardson through a very small sample for Richardson, because he missed a game, 3 weeks. Less than 3 weeks. He also got knocked out early in his second game, if I remember correctly. But being that I've been proven right so far, I'm going to say hold on to the person that I thought was undervalued heading into the season and trade Lamar Jackson. And for Lamar, I'm hoping to get someone probably on that wide receiver 1-2 border, maybe with, say, like Chris Olave underperforming last week and Derek Carr clearly dealing with the shoulder injury. You might even say like, oh, I'm going to buy low on him and understand that I eat probably 2 more L's because Derek Carr's shoulder is messed up. But in the long run, I'm coming away with a win. Or Lamar Jackson and then something to get Jamar Chase, who, again, his quarterback, not looking great so far, but he's still Jamar Chase. So, to me, I would try and buy low on a potential like wide receiver top 15 type of player and trade Lamar Jackson to get that. Maybe it's Lamar Jackson and then something else even, but I'm holding on to Ant and then trading Lamar is my move. Pat?
I think you have to get a certified wide receiver too. You have to get a legit wide receiver too. I mean, we know it's a quarterback and they're always undervalued. Some home leagues, they're not undervalued. I also agree with trading Lamar because I just don't think there's much difference between them at this point. But Lamar is going to have much more trade value, especially like in a home league. He's such an established brand. Would you trade Lamar Jackson for Puka Nacua? Especially if you know Cooper Kupp is back this week.
You're saying I would take the Puka side.
Yeah,
honestly,
I would too.
It's not
I would too.
Super close to me.
Because I think that could be like a best case scenario outcome. Someone trying to like, all right, Cooper Kupp's getting back. I'm selling high on Puka Nacua. That might be unrealistic, but I would.
No, I think that's realistic. I am sure that is an opinion that is so wide standard deviation that a bunch of people would tell you, oh my God, Puka, free money, sell Puka right now. To me, he has been a true stud through 4 weeks. I'm taking that guy. That's a good example though.
I'm going to answer this one really quickly. Sam Howell's way better matchup in the Bears. Josh Dobbs has the Bengals. Josh Dobbs, he's been competent. He's been like a hero, but he has not been great for fantasy and will not be great for fantasy. Sam Howell will have disaster weeks, but Sam Howell looking like a true streamer where you find a good matchup and you can use him. The Bears are a good matchup for Sam Howell.
Who do you think has scored more fantasy points this year, Dobbs or Howell?
I'm gonna guess Sam Howell. I'm gonna tell me that you're gonna tell me that it's Dobbs, but
I am fairly confident it is Dobbs because it's not by a wide margin. Dobbs is QB 14, Sam Howell is QB 17, and it is specifically because Dobbs has put together games of 40-something, and 50-something rushing yards. I agree. Sam Howell this week, very specifically this week. But if you needed like a 5-week starter, frankly, I would take Dobbs. Howell, I think, is more likely to get benched in the next 3 to 4 weeks than even finish out that stretch.
I think Dobbs is just kind of steady eddying, and Howell is going to mix like disaster weeks with more usable. I think this week is not even close. Again, Howell against the Bears versus Dobbs against the Bengals. The Bengals are going to be going like a defense first too.
I agree. When I do my rankings on Wednesday, I'm going to have Howell ahead of Dobbs, but I think it's closer than you think.
Real quick here, we've already talked about Jaleel McLaughlin, but let's zero in on what is appropriate for Jaleel McLaughlin. Is he worth a top waiver priority? And what percent of your fab would you burn on Jaleel McLaughlin?
Yeah, waivers are brutal this week. I mean, if you need
they are absolutely brutal. It's one of the least talented waivers weeks I've ever seen.
Yeah, the first 3 weeks too were really fun because we got like Kyron, Puka, even Tutu Atwell as the second receiver on that team have all been very exciting types of ads. And this week, Jaleel McLaughlin, I'm still like we talked about this earlier. I'm still going to project him as sort of a 1B in this backfield, and it's a team that like probably going to keep losing football games. Maybe he goes out and gets more routes, but that's what Pirine does is he serves as the routes guy. So if you need a running back, he is, and like there are some leagues where Jalen Warren is out there, for example, but on the average league, he's probably the best ad at running back. What type of fab am I spending on him? 5 to 7%. He's at best a 2-week RB3 essentially. For that guy, Frankly, I'm willing to gamble on like, oh, maybe Tyjae Spears catches 4 balls this game. I'm not trying to outbid the number 2 guy on Jaleel. And I think Jaleel is a very fun prospect, but just in terms of his role and the long-term outlook, neither of them are particularly strong.
I agree with that breakdown completely. Is Garrett Wilson still worth holding? We got some signs of life from Garrett Wilson last night.
Yeah.
We got some very unexpected signs of life from Zach Wilson. Feels kind of unsustainable for me, and he's still 14 targets. He can only turn them into 60 yards. Again, that's more the quarterback's fault than Garrett Wilson's fault. He does have the Broncos this week. Any reason to think he's the Broncos this week, and he's the Eagles really struggling pass defense in 2 weeks, although that front seven's going to wreck Zach Wilson. What is the lay of the Garrett Wilson land is what KD needs to know.
Well, I didn't realize they played the Broncos next week because I've looked
at some of the Broncos.
Basically anyone I think is worthy on waivers of, maybe I got to add Zach Wilson to the streamers column too for quarterback, because like Justin Fields looked truly bench worthy in the Zach Wilson territory of the amount of mistakes he was making. And then he plays the Broncos and he gets career highs in yards, touchdowns, completions. He has one of the best games in PFF passing grade on the week. He has one of the best games in CPOE on the week, EPA. This is to tell you that the Broncos defense is just dreadful. I think
very, very bad. It's weird. They're so bad. They could also be streamer worthy. I feel like for the second straight week, they could play poorly, but also be a good defensive streamer because they're playing such a bad offense.
It is weird. Yeah, last week I think they were a very viable streamer, but it turned out it was completely
They actually did okay. They got home.
I know they ended the game with a pick that ended.
They got a fumble 6 from Justin Fields, and they had a pick that ended the game.
Oh yeah, you're right. I forgot about the fumble 6. Yeah,
it's like a weird defensive streamer where I think they could both be attacked, but also get you points as a streamer
and do some attacking.
Yeah.
Garrett, but back to the whole point of the question, Garrett Wilson, absolutely worth holding. I think maybe in this spot, I actually do get to bump him back into the wide receiver 2 range. Heading into last week, he outperformed my expectation. And the week before that, he was struggling to hold on to wide receiver 3 territory because Zach Wilson, I think, is very clearly the worst starting quarterback in the NFL. The worst starting quarterback in the NFL looks like a top 10 player when he plays the Broncos. We saw that last week. So Garrett Wilson is not only worth holding, but I'll be happy to start him in week 5, which is something that probably won't be true in week 6 or 7. But the Broncos are on pace to be one of the worst defenses of the past 20 years. They'll regress to being bad, but not the worst. That's still enough to get Garrett Wilson going.
Garrett Wilson, too, what it really just boils down to is you can't get fair value for Garrett Wilson right now. You might as well keep him on your team. We saw he's the kind of player, he needs one target and he could win a matchup. When he had the 68-yard touchdown against the Cowboys, he might have flipped your matchup. And they're going to get more creative getting him the ball. We finally saw some of that last night. They're like, whatever. We are force-feeding Garrett Wilson targets. And it was only 9 for 60, but that was an abnormally low output. Even if they're really low-quality targets, if you give Garrett Wilson 12 to 14 targets, he's going to turn that into 90 to 100 yards, probably 80 to 90% of the time. I think we might have already weathered the worst with Garrett Wilson, as I say, famous last words with Mr. Zach Wilson. Trade offer, Michael Thomas and Raheem Mostert for Damian Pierce and Michael Pittman. How do we feel, Kyle?
Oh, I like that. I like that. I mean, I would take both the running back over the running back and the receiver over the receiver. That's good work.
A really good trade. You improved the squad there, Chef Inabi. You really, really improved the trade, improved the squad. Lindorphins, a weekly viewer. What's the higher over under? It's not a real question. Sorry. I own a lot of polo shirts. I'm a very dignified father in my mid 30s. I can't be hip or cool anymore. And polos are they're an investment. And they mature, they age, they gain. I own far too many polos.
Pat, hold on.
She got me real good.
With fathers, they love to recycle clothes. They're not going to say, I had this giant wardrobe of clothes. They're saying, I have Roy G. Biv levels of polos. I have one of every color, and I'll run them back. Whereas the KC Minnesota game, what total do you think that has? I'm going to guess 52.5.
52.5 was actually what popped into my head, but I think it might be under 50 because of how shaky the Chiefs' offenses looked. shaky, relatively speaking, in this case,
Sure.
of course. I feel like the Chiefs have been hammering unders this season. But there's almost no way that game will be below 50, though.
Guess what it is? Guess what the total is?
49.5?
52.5, baby.
Yeah, 52.5 felt intellectually correct, actually. I should not have second-guessed myself. Here's a really interesting question from Malachi. Thoughts on Jamison Williams? Got 2 games lopped off his 6-game suspension. He's finally back. Josh Reynolds has been looking pretty good as like a deep role-playing deep threat for the Lions. Jamison Williams is having a poor training camp, even before the suspension. But former first-round pick, in theory, still a ton of upside and a really good offense, kind of player they need right now. What are we telling people about Jamison Williams?
I think he's worth a stash, but I like you said, Josh Reynolds is serviceable. As someone who played him in DFS like 2 weeks ago, I think he blanked me that week. But that is also the nature of being a deep threat for Jared Goff, is sometimes you just get blanked. So he's worth a stash, but I'm not playing him this week. He's probably not running around a lot of routes this week, so I'm not playing him the next week. Maybe the week after that, he runs a bunch of routes, but I need to see it first. So you're literally holding him until you actually put him in your starting roster for 4 more weeks. I think he's a very specific kind of player where if you have a sort of, I'll say juggernaut type of team where you don't need the depth, I'd love to be holding him. In most other scenarios, though, I'm very happy to watch someone burn the roster spot while I can churn for like finding the next Julian McLaughlin or Gus Edwards or hopefully the next Kyron Williams or Devon A-Chain, preferably. But, they exist on the spectrum.
Yeah, I think the best case scenario for Jamison Williams is 2023 fantasy value is that he rebuilds his dynasty value, basically.
That's a good way to put it.
Very, very difficult to see him, especially in these first 5 or 6 weeks, like you said, generating like legit 12-team redraft value. Should we trade Jordan Addison and Alexander Mattison? We're shipping out all of our Minnesota Vikings. We're tired of watching Kirk Cousins for Kyron Williams. A pretty interesting 2-for-1. A lot of times 2-for-1s, you're trying to trade 2 like second-tier guys for a first-tier guy. This is 2 kind of second-tier players for someone who's not quite in that first tier, but I actually don't know what side I would take. What do we tell Woodboy?
I think you take the Kyron side. I mean, Kyron is playing truly the role of a top flight RB1. I mean, you look at his snap shares in the past 3 games, 73%, 100%, 97% in terms of the amount of carries he's seen out of the entire backfield, 74%, 83%, 78%. He's running all the routes. He gets, in the past 3 weeks, they have not given a carry inside the 5 to another player on the team. Like, he is getting, I don't want to say Christian McCaffrey level workload, but in terms of the cut of the pie, it literally is Christian McCaffrey. They just, of course, don't design as many touches for him. He's getting Tony Pollard, let's say, levels of workload. And this is an offense that, while they may not put up a ton of points, they're playing fast. They're trying to get points on the board. They're not like going into their shell whenever they go down by 10 points. I would take the Kyron side of this, and that's from someone who at least loved Jordan Addison, not as much Alexander Mattison.
A lot of times in a 2-for-1, you're trying to cash them in. You're trying to like pull a scam, basically. You're not really pulling a scam here in this 2-for-1, but
Sure.
I still think the golden rule of a 2-for-1 is who is the best player.
Yep.
And I agree with you that Kyron Williams is the best player in this deal. These are the kind of questions that are so hard to answer off the top of your head. The Camper Report wants to know
I've got the easiest one in the world. Tony Pollard. He's still my rest of season RB2. I swear to God, again, I didn't look at the numbers exactly, but he got like 5 more red zone touches. He remains every week in the 32 stats, I believe. I write, he's on pace for the most red zone touches a running back has ever seen in NFL history. It's particularly not even close. And yet he has like 2 touchdowns on the season. He's way below his expected fantasy points. And even if you just assume he is a league average back, let's take the last few seasons and say he was totally a product of being Zeke's backup. I think that's garbage, but I'll just concede that argument to you. He's average. He should be the RB2. His role is that of the 2nd overall back in fantasy, just behind Christian McCaffrey. To me, if you can get him for anything other than the 2nd overall running back price, windmill pick.
I'll try to keep it brief. Would you consider Ramondre Stevenson a buy low?
Yeah, sure. I think actually, no, I'm going to say no. I think he's probably fairly valued. Zeke's actually playing decent. Ramondre does seem to be suffering from some of that wear and tear of getting a bunch of touches. His efficiency is cratered this year. and the Patriots literally benched their starting quarterback last week. He's fine. I don't think he's under or overvalued.
A comment I'm not going to share from Eli. I was going to say thank you, Eli. I agree with you. Stevie, I know who Stevie is. He likes to ask the tough questions. He wants to know who is the best player you would trade for Nico Collins in Dynasty. He was having kind of a fairly late breakout. It seems to be a very legitimate breakout. Stevie, I don't know. I don't think Austin Eckler's quiet quitting. I'll say I don't think he's quiet quitting. Shame on you, Stevie, for saying that. But that's a really interesting question. How in the world do we value Nico Collins in Dynasty? It was taken forever for him to break out, but it took forever for him to get a legitimate quarterback. He got a legitimate quarterback once, and now he looks really, really good.
I think he's a top 15 wide receiver. I think you could even sell me closer to top 12. And
he's probably top 12 in Dynasty, I would say.
I mean, he's got to be top 5 in receiving yards right now, and he's probably 25 years old. He has a quarterback who is probably, he's on pace to set every single rookie quarterback passing record we've ever seen. Yeah, actually, no, he's probably top 15 is a little disrespectful. I'm going to say he's like top 10. If you told me you were a rebuilding team who had no use for present value points, totally ship him for Cooper Kupp.
Tyler has been wondering about Jalen Waddle and is he benchable? Definitely not benchable.
Nope.
The usage hasn't been even been different than last year, Kyle. I feel like he's just running cold and that the usage is as good as we need it to be. And he's just kind of flukily not had a big game yet. And of course, the head injury did not help.
Yeah, Denny pulled all these stats for us, so I don't have to do any leg lifting on this one. But heading into week 4, I haven't checked out week 4 yet, but he was running the same amount of routes. He was seeing roughly the same amount of target share. And heading into last week, he still led the NFL in yards per reception. And even after a pretty quiet week 4, he is very close to leading the NFL in yards per reception again. He just hasn't broken that final long touchdown, right? There is the one final piece that we're missing, but otherwise he is extremely efficient on a per catch basis. He's catching more of his passes than he did last year. He's averaging more yards per target than he did last year. I totally agree that there is no change in usage. We're just waiting for an offense that can put up 70 points in a game to finally get the ball to him on that one specific play where he goes 50 yards and a touchdown, because in every other metric, he's been extremely efficient. We just haven't gotten the 30-yard touchdown, which Tyreek has gotten all of. So, no, we're not benching him. I'm probably still going to have him ranked as wide receiver 15.
I'm going to keep him right on that, especially now there's 4 teams on bye this week, so you might easily.
True.
Yeah. We're getting a molten level breakout soon from Jalen Waddle. Cris basically wondering, are we concerned about Trevor Lawrence, who was not popping in the advanced stats and now is not popping in the old eye test of late? Are we concerned about Trevor Lawrence, who was looking like him last year, Kyle? Now he's not hemming nearly as hard in 2023.
Heading into this London game, which he had Sunday morning.
And now he's yet another London game because the Jags insist on being
6 games a year is weird contract they signed to play in London.
Anyways, so many games in London. A lot of London games, more than a normal amount of London games.
He was getting buried by specifically drops. He had lost the most EPA per play on drops, and it wasn't particularly close. He had 2 more drops of his receivers, at least, of any other quarterback. He was still top 5 in big time throw rate on PFF's charting, and he was outside the top 25 in turnover worthy play rate. He looked as good as ever. I haven't checked on how he played in London. I also watched that game. He looked fine. So
he looked fine. It was a weird game. The London games are always just I feel like I'm watching a game through a Packard Bell monitor. Nothing about it seems normal when you're watching a game in London.
It's especially not normal when Jonnu Smith has the most receiving yards of any tight end in a single game in 2023. I mean, their opponent was clearly never going to push them. I've never seen a more solved matchup than when Desmond Ridder goes down by 10 points. The game is over and you know it instantly. So I'm not too concerned about the fantasy point output from Trevor Lawrence from that game. I'm still expecting the team to play better in the long run. It's possible that his 2022 stats slightly overrated him, but even looking at the PFF charting, they think he's still one of the better quarterbacks in the league this year. So I'm holding the faith though I admit it's been frustrating.
Malachi compares watching a game in London to watching an NBA game during the bubble. It is kind of
Except
a weird...
the game sucked. Didn't the NBA score a bunch of points or something?
The NBA games, I thought that was the only good bubble, I thought. Because like the players were like so into it. And basketball can become so intimate. Whereas like empty baseball stadiums was extremely haunting and disturbing.
No, who was the there's I believe a Braves pitcher, was it Strider, who fires up Twitter every few weeks by saying oh no, don't bring any fans back. Is it Strider?
Yeah. Strider has been known to do a troll once or twice on Twitter.
He's got a good bit going.
Craig is wondering, temperature check for George Pickens. Kenny Pickett is week to week with a bruised knee. It seems like he's probably going to play in week 5. I don't know if there's any real difference.
Is that what the vibe is? I haven't been checking.
The vibe is that he's probably going to. The vibe is that he's actually 50-50. He's questionable.
Okay, all right.
He's not going on injured reserve. I don't know if there's even a huge difference between Kenny Pickett and Mitch Trubisky at this point. What is our temperature check on George Pickens? Deontay Johnson is eligible to return from injured reserve in week 6.
Yeah, the temperature for me is relatively low. He's not a guy who gets separation, and he doesn't have a quarterback who can accurately throw those I turn a 50-50 ball into a 60-40 ball. There are two parts to that equation, which a receiver who I think is good at that aspect of the game, and George Pickens, can make those balls look more advantageous than they generally would be. You also need a quarterback who can place those throws, and Pickett has been one of the least accurate and least efficient quarterbacks, and if he's not playing this week, I think it's probably close to a lateral move. Like you said, as much as Steelers fans might not like to hear that, it's probably close to a lateral move, but lateral from Kenny Pickett this year is among the least efficient quarterbacks in the league. So I'd try to move on from him, frankly, but that's mostly based on my negativity on the Steelers offense. I still think he has a skill set that can produce value, but not in the way the team is set up right now, and not with Deontay Johnson coming back and earning targets in a way that's very easy for a quarterback to see, whereas he's generated a little bit of separation 6 yards downfield. Easy target. Throw it that way. Pickens
is going to be hard to sell, but I totally agree. There's still George Pickens believers out there. If you can find one, I would be selling high, selling low, whatever the sell is on George Pickens. I would be doing it. Jerry Medina wonders, so earlier you talked about Madison over Cam Akers, but Cam Akers, though, clearly should be 100% rostered, correct? He needs to be.
Didn't he see 5 carries last week and is the most inefficient running back in the league?
Besides that, it's getting tough out here. Bye weeks, injuries, Kyle. They clearly want it to be a 2-man backfield. I do think they want it to be a 2-man backfield.
Alexander Madison carried him 17-5 last week.
He was making his debut.
Well, he could have made his debut the week before, but he wasn't ready.
You about this? You got me a phone? This can't make it.
I would take Latavius Murray, Tajay Spears, Jaleel McLaughlin over him.
I'm just so not a Madison believer, but yeah, I don't know. Cam Akers.
I agree. I am not really a Madison believer. He's played better. He played better last week at least, and he saw a ton of work in the week before that. But Cam Akers so far has looked like one of the least efficient backs, and he looked extremely inefficient in general coming off the Achilles. And then his team shipped him off for what is essentially nothing. It's pretty, to me, it's pretty unlikely. He needs to hit 500 yards from scrimmage for the conditional swap to hit. I think it's fairly unlikely that he even hits that. So essentially his team cut him. There's really no difference on cutting him versus not meeting your conditional swap. So I'm going to say you have to be in a deep league to pick him up. I'm taking, like I said, Tajay Spears, Jaleel McLaughlin, Latavius Murray. I'm taking those guys over him.
I'm agreeing with all those guys over him. Maybe not Latavius. I do think Cam Akers, you got to try to ride it out another week or two in a 12-team league. I will say, almost out of time. I'm going to try to answer 3 more questions. We'll try to go quickly. The Admiral needs to know who is the better standard league stash. I think there's a clear answer. Well, I don't know. Deontay Johnson, Jamison Williams. Would you rather stash Deontay Johnson or Chris Godwin? That's how I'm going to phrase this question to you, Kyle.
I think Godwin. Do you know the status on Mike Evans, who left this week for a game with an injury and was ruled out? Do you have a vibe face?
He was campaigning to return, probably because he wanted to challenge Marshawn Lattimore to yet another.
Oh, game. Yeah.
But I don't think it was that serious. He was stumping to return to the game on Sunday.
You know what? I'll say with that, Deontay, because I think they fulfill similar roles in their offense, except Evans is going to see, Evans has to this point seen significantly more targets, more air yards, and a ton, like he's been dominating the red zone and end zone work, whereas Deontay Johnson can actually fulfill that role because Pickens isn't much of a separator. He's not I can win a one-on-one ball at the 1 yard line, whereas Evans can actually physically body out another guy like that. So I'm going to say Deontay, though I'm totally open for the Chris Godwin argument.
I'll let your answer stand. We're running out of time. How do we trust Calvin Ridley? I think we still trust Calvin Ridley, and he's just kind of running a little cold. But do you think it's something deeper than just running a little cold for Calvin Ridley?
Yeah, I mean, he got annihilated in terms of targets. It was like 10-2.
He was banged up. He was not declared with an injury, and he did finish the game. He was banged up is one of the excuses I'll make for him. But it's a monster week 1, and then basically 3 straight weeks where we're making excuses. I will say that for Calvin Ridley, where he's had alibis, but the problem is that we've needed alibis for Calvin Ridley. So yeah, how do we trust
That's a good way to
Calvin
put it.
Ridley?
He's had alibis, and he's absolutely needed those alibis. I mean, we're at a 3-to-1 ratio of Christian Kirk looking like the better receiver. And this is from someone who I thought Ridley would come in and take over. Week 1 is sort of confirmed some of my priors. I still think you trust him in that he's very clearly the number 2. And for me, it's sort of easy to say this because I think the Jags offense will bounce back. I think Trevor Lawrence is better than what we've seen so far. So I can kind of fold that into my Calvin Ridley rebound analysis. But if you don't believe that, it's a much harder point to sell because at this point, I think the best pitch you can make is Ridley as a 1A, and you can very clearly make an argument that he's just a straight up number 2 receiver.
Ooh.
So to me, the optimistic outlook, which I somewhat hold, is that he's a 1A on an offense that should bounce back, but you have to sort of fold in a lot of beliefs to believe that.
Yeah, that felt way too correct to me. And let's say not what I needed to hear. Final question of the night. Sorry if we've missed your question. It is truly nothing personal. It's just kind of much like clicking. It's hard. Thank you so much for the questions. But Roshan Johnson still worth the hold after yet another week where like, oh, he's going to get more touches and carries and
we
stuff.
got like the official reports from, I think it was maybe Jeremy Fowler. Apologies if it wasn't Fowler, but it was.
They're all good reporters too, but they keep reporting he's going to get more work and then it just doesn't happen. And now again, injuries, bye weeks kicking in. What is the state of play with Roshan Johnson?
I mean, we're still holding Roshan because especially up until last week, we actually were getting an increasing role. He had an increased snap share in back-to-back weeks heading into week 4, an increased in total rush attempt share, his cut of the team's carries in back-to-back weeks as well. And that just fell off the face of the earth in week 4. He was completely shut out to true backup running back duties in week 4. The flip side of that is that Khalil Herbert looked really good. You can understand why if they're sort of saying, well, if Khalil Herbert fails again this week, or at least doesn't blow our minds again this week, we're going to get Roshan more touches. Then Khalil Herbert goes out and starts ripping off long runs, and you say, we can't bench this guy. So I'm going to say in the long run, like, who do you think scores more points from week 10 to 15, Roshan or Khalil Herbert? I have my answer. Go ahead.
Man, I think it honestly might still end up being Khalil Herbert, which I don't.
I'm going to take Roshan on that bet. I think by that point,
I just feel like if he was going to become undeniable, he would have already become undeniable.
I think he isn't undeniable, but neither is Khalil Herbert.
That is true. Khalil Herbert he can be denied.
He's deniable, yeah.
Yeah, he can be denied and has been denied. Unfortunately, the rest of the chat is denied because it's over. Really, really good stuff tonight, guys. Thank you so much. We'll be back next week at 6 p.m. Eastern on October 9th to talk all your waiver questions, all your going forward questions. Hopefully we get a good game tonight. We need a good showing from the New York Football Giants. We just want a good primetime game for once. So for Kyle Dvorchak, I'm Patrick Daugherty. Thank you so much for participating. We will be back next week.